You're not getting any younger, so
enjoy life as it comes at you and go with it.
Hey you! Yes, you! Welcome to the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast, a podcast for people who want to disrupt their lives for a good reason, to make it count. I'm your host, Jen Glantz, and every week I'll drop a new episode with stories from real people just like you, who woke up one morning and decided to make big changes, starting with small things. We'll cover topics like entrepreneurship, love, failure, and self-care. Hey, you're not getting any younger, so let's make this an adventure. Ready? News is such a big part of our lives. We consume it online, watch it on the TV screen, scroll down and get bite-sized chunks of it on Twitter. But have you ever taken a moment to imagine who the people are behind the words, behind the stories, behind the moments that we will all remember forever? Emma Gray has been penning articles for the Huffington Post for more years than she can count on one hand. She's currently a senior reporter focusing on women's issues, and on November 8th, 2016, while covering the Hillary Clinton election and practically having a panic attack once she found out she lost, Emma decided to use her voice, her platform, and her knowledge, and she became the author of A Girl's Guide to Joining the Resistance, a book that helps other women learn how to fight the fight. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and make sure you join us in the You're Not Getting Any Younger Facebook group so we can hear more about your story and what you're doing, because you too, my dear friend, are not getting any younger. So, let's make this an adventure. I remember I came to the Huffington Post office, which was the coolest thing in the world because I'd never been, and you always wonder what an office is going to look like. And I remember in the Huffington Post office, you guys had so many books everywhere.
Yes. Oh, we get sent a ton of books, and we have many, many bookshelves. It's one of the perks of working in a newsroom.
I just remember thinking that was my first newsroom I ever saw, and I was like, there are books everywhere. I would love to one day work here. This is the coolest thing ever. But I remember when I met you, I thought, wow, this woman is amazing. I was like, this person, I could see myself being good friends with. She's so cool. And I wonder where her career is going to go. And fast forward a couple of years later, I've been following you on social media, which is funny because when you follow someone on social media that you don't see in person, you create these stories in your head about them. And what's funny about you is that your social media handle name is Emma Lady Rose. So in my head, whenever I refer to you,
that's that way.
Yeah, which is like so weird because coming here, I'm like, all right, that's not her name, but it's super crazy. And I bring this up because I was recently on your Twitter, and after the news of Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain's suicide, you posted a tweet that said, "Today is a good day to be more honest and open about your own mental health and offer support to others. The stigma is still very real, and talking is the only way to break it." What made you tweet this?
Well, I think it's just, I don't even know. I mean, I think it was a really hard week last week for a lot of people. Anyone who has struggled with mental health, anyone who Anthony Bourdain or Kate Spade meant something to, which is probably most of us. Mm-hmm. Most of us fall into one, if not all of those categories. And I think it's clear that even if you are someone who outwardly appears to, quote, have it all, have this great life, have all of the opportunities, have found love and have a family, etc., those things are not mutually exclusive from serious mental health issues. And we don't, in this country, treat mental health with the same reverence that we treat physical health. And we still stigmatize people who come forward with mental health issues and are open about them. So I think the more that we can talk about these things, not that everyone has to pour their guts out on the internet. That is not everyone's style. But I think as much as we can be honest about our own mental health struggles, the less stigmatized it's going to be, because it just becomes more commonplace. And that was really evident in the number of responses I got to that tweet. You know, it was pretty overwhelming. People were just sharing all of these incredible and heart-wrenching stories about their own struggles. And I saw people, you know, even responding to each other saying like, wow, I'm here for you. That's really hard, but I'm so thankful that I'm not alone. And I know that when, you know, I went into therapy for my own anxiety disorder, it was really freeing to suddenly just feel like I could talk about it. And I have been extremely lucky to have colleagues that have been really wonderful and accommodating and open about their own mental health struggles, and a supportive, you know, community. But I think the more that we can, you know, speak about mental health honestly, the better off we are.
You know, it's crazy. When I started this podcast, I didn't mean for mental health to be a topic. I didn't think I would.
It's in everywhere.
Yeah, but almost every single guest I talk to, and I talk to a lot of people who are doing interesting things with their lives or who are very successful in their career, they all have a story about mental health, whether it's their own struggle or the struggle of people around them. And it's becoming more of something that I'm happy people are talking about. But one of the things you did that I was moved by was you retweeted or you requoted every single person who answered you. And if you look through Emma's Twitter feed, you see a ton of other people's voices coming forward about their mental health struggle. What made you decide, okay, I'm going to give these people's voice, you know, a light and put them on my own Twitter feed?
Well, I think as soon as I tweeted that, I wasn't sure what the response would be. And as soon as I saw that it was starting a conversation, I wanted to just amplify that. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that, you know, you're a storyteller, I'm a storyteller. As storytellers, we are taught to not just amplify our own experiences, but the experience of others. And that is one thing that I feel extremely fortunate to have been able to build a platform. So if I can just, you know, boost that person's story a little bit more and allow other people to respond, then, you know, I've sort of done my job, kind of.
You do have a pretty big platform on social media that you've been growing over the years. Does that ever make you feel like you have a certain pressure put on you to use your voice wisely, to really make sure what you're putting out there to the world has purpose?
Oh, absolutely. If you have a platform, you have a responsibility to use it for good. You have a responsibility to be responsible for what you put out into the world. You know, own up to any mistakes you make, and be really thoughtful. Not everyone has the ability to reach as many people as I do, and there's certainly a lot of people that have the ability to reach a lot more people than even I do. So it is something that I don't take lightly, and I think, you know, none of us should.
Yeah. I want to start your story off when you graduated from college. So first of all, what did you study when you were in college?
I studied sociology, and then I had a double minor in political science and sexual diversity studies.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot to study. And when you left college with all of those different interesting subject matters that you had majored in or studied, what were your plans after?
I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I knew that I loved writing. I knew that I wanted to do something that felt socially conscious in some respect. And I sort of had two potential paths. I thought I could go into educational policy, sexual health, something policy-wise, or I could try this media thing. I knew that I loved writing, as I said, and I had done some writing and editing for my university newspaper. I'd edited an academic journal. And I figured, I'm young, I can afford to fail right now very easily. And I'm already planning on, you know, living off of not a lot of money. So I might as well try this writer thing first. And then if that doesn't work out, I'll recalibrate it. And I think I can, you know, go back to school, do something in some of the other areas I feel passionately about. And it somehow worked out.
What made you have the confidence? Because I know when I graduated at 22 and I was going to try to do the writer thing, all I could think about was, you're going to fail, you're going to fail, you're going to fail. So what gave you the confidence to say, I'm going to move to New York City and I'm going to give this a full-on try?
I don't even know. I always knew I was going to move to New York, so that was just a given for me.
Where are you from originally?
I'm from outside Washington, D.C., okay. Silver Spring, Maryland, just on the metro. And I always knew I wanted to live in New York. I almost went to school in New York, but ended up deciding to take a gap year and then go to school in Montreal, Canada, which was a fantastic decision. But when I made that decision, I thought, okay, it's great. I'll go to university elsewhere. And then when I graduate, I'm going to move to New York. That's just, I always knew I wanted to do that at some point in my life. So I knew that I just wanted to look for jobs in New York. And that was, I think, maybe the driving force. Like, I was going to take any job that would pay me enough money that I could just move to New York, get a crappy apartment, and try to enter the workforce. And I think because I hadn't been doing a million internships, I didn't have a ton of connections, it almost took the pressure off because it didn't feel like I had been spending years and years and years preparing for this thing so that if I failed, it was some huge letdown. It was just a thing I was going to leap out into the world and try to do.
It's almost more fun that way because you literally have nothing, so you have nothing to lose.
Exactly.
At that point. But and then, I think that's interesting because this was something that you did when you were fresh out of college, but there are people who are in their late 20s, early 30s, 40s who are completely switching industries that should have that same mindset. So what kind of advice do you have for people who are like, hey, I have no experience, I don't know a person in that industry, I have no internships, I just want to break in and do it?
Do the work. And this is something that, people can take away from you too. You just start using the tools that are in front of you and doing the work. If you want to be a writer, you just have to write. I wrote for free for a long time. I wrote a lot of really crappy stories that I probably wouldn't be super proud to look back on, but it was practice. It got my name out there. It was building up a body of work bit by bit. And I think that probably applies across industries.
Yeah. I hate to say it because it is so easy, but when people will ask me, like, how do you write a book? How do you become a writer? How do you do this? The answer is just do it, and also realize that success isn't going to happen for a very long time. And oftentimes you're doing that work and you're invisible.
Yes.
And what was that time like for you when you were writing for free, when you were just writing for anybody? What was that time like?
It was really hard. And it's so funny. I look back now, I had a bunch of, informational interviews when I first moved to the city. And an older cousin, a second cousin of mine, has worked in publishing for years. And so I had lunch with him. And I remember him basically telling me, like, that industry is messed up. It's dying. You're probably not going to get a job in it. Like, basically implying, like, just don't even do it. And I'm really glad I didn't listen to him, even though, like, he probably made some really good points, and it's a lot easier to be cynical about something once you're kind of in the midst of it.
Yeah.
But sorry, I totally lost track.
No, but that's like a good point, because when you feel invisible, when you're just starting out and you're putting in the work and people tell you, hey, it's not a good idea, or you should just stick at your job as an accountant, you want to believe them, but you had a fire that said, I'm just going to do this.
Yes, exactly. Right. Being invisible. And that beginning part also isn't easy. I don't want to pretend that I just had this magical confidence and it all felt great and like it was going to work out. My first job in New York was essentially writing glorified business listings. A bunch of people who were all contractors for this hyper-local news organization, but we were working out of the New York office. We were all contractors. We all were overqualified for the job, and it was monotonous work, but a really fun group of people. So after about 10 months, I was like, I got to get out of here, probably at the 6-month mark. And I spent month after month after month just applying for tons and tons of jobs, and I was not getting them. It was so frustrating. I remember calling my mom and just crying at one point, like, I'm never going to get a job. And then the truth is, you only need one to work out. So you just have to kind of push through those moments and keep going and keep doing that work, even when it feels terrible. And that's the truth about being in the workforce as a whole. It's work. It doesn't always feel great. There's not always a great payoff. But if you love what you do, then those moments of kind of glory outweigh all of the bad stuff.
Thank you for saying that, because I think that people don't understand sometimes when they get that dream job, they get the job they've been working so hard for, or they get a job in the hobby that they love, that it's all going to come together. Every day is going to feel like magic. You're going to wake up in the morning and say, yes, I get to go to work today. But it's not true. You know, you have moments where you are tired. You have moments where you hate what you're doing. You have moments where you just are unsure of everything. I mean, but that's normal. That's normal life.
It's life. Exactly. And I think if we can do away with this idea that there is this moment we're going to reach where we have all the things and suddenly we're enlightened and all of our issues go away, that's never going to happen.
No.
And so everything is going to feel like a disappointment if we expect that. And I don't know if you found this with the process of writing a book, but I found it as a whole to be somewhat anticlimactic, despite the fact that it's been a lifelong dream of mine and it's something I'm very proud that I accomplished.
Yeah, no, I talk about this a lot, that it is one of the most depressing and lonely things in the world. I mean, I always say, like, I thought when the book came out in Barnes & Noble, like, I would go there and I would cry and be like, this is my child. And I went there and I was like, this is it.
Yeah, yes. It's a lot of, I tried to explain it to people. There's a lot of performative excitement that you have to do, which is also work.
Yeah.
And promoting your book is a lot of work and it's painful. And no one cares as much as you do.
No, they don't.
And you just have to square that within yourself and be satisfied that you did the thing.
Well, you know what? It's almost like whatever job you have these days, that's just not your only job. For example, as a writer writing a book, you no longer just write the book, send it to the publisher, and go live your life. You write the book, and then you spend 6 months, a year, figuring out how to promoting it like crazy, and whether or not it sells falls back on you and determines the future of your career, and that could be very scary, speaking from experience. But it's an interesting process because you, as a writer, you get so sidetracked and it becomes much more than just the craft of writing. Now it becomes the voice in my head. Is this going to sell? What about this chapter? Will I offend anyone? Will people like this? And we'll talk about your book in a little bit, but you write about topics that I can see half of the people being sort of offended by because you're coming from one point of view. And it might be the same with writing for the Huffington Post. You know, you started as an assistant editor, you've grown your career, you've written about a wide variety of topics. Do you ever get feedback that makes you just so frustrated from people who are reading this that don't agree or just have negative things to say?
You certainly get a lot of feedback if you are a woman on the internet, period. Definitely if you are a woman on the internet with a moderate platform who writes about feminism. And, I've had to learn to tune out certain feedback because there are a lot of people that are not there to have a conversation or a dialogue, and you cannot have a dialogue with someone who is not there to have a dialogue with you. And that is a very important lesson to learn. So
in life too.
In life too, exactly. That goes for in-person conversations also. You can certainly be in conversation with people that radically disagree with you, but you both have to be coming to the table with the intention of having a conversation. And a lot of people, especially on a platform like Twitter, are not there for that. So I've had to learn to tune out a lot of that and really focus on the critical feedback from people that I would think I do agree with. That has been probably some of the most challenging and also helpful critical feedback that I've gotten on my work over the years is from people that I believe I do align with, but who have identified, a gap in my perspective or something I didn't explain properly. And that is the feedback that, again, is almost the hardest to take because you can't just write it off as, oh, that's just some troll. And also the most helpful in my own personal growth as a writer and reporter.
I appreciate that. And I've been writing for the internet for a while, and some of these comments, they really, you don't want them to bring you down, but they do.
Yes.
I had one person send me a personal email. They made up an email address saying that I should take a long walk off a short bridge because how I was representing women was disgusting, when everything I write is positive toward women. I've never once written anything not supporting women, but it just didn't fancy their views. And comments like that to comments like, I read your book and, I wish you would have mentioned this type of topic. How could you have not? And because of that, here's 1 star and I hope you never write again. How do you deal with outrageous comments and bullying that you get on the internet?
I mean, and certainly I get comments about my looks, really horrific sexist stuff. Being a white woman, I certainly, don't have to deal with the racist, disgusting crap that a lot of my colleagues do. But it's tough, from fat shaming to, I can't even being called a cunt. Like all of these things they're exhausting. And I have honestly just disengaged with a lot of it. I don't even read my Goodreads reviews for my book because it's out there. I can't change the things. I can't make it a different book that someone who might want it to be. It is what it is. So part of it is just, again, letting it go and actually not engaging with it and being verified on Twitter. I do have the luxury of being able to actually only look at mentions from other verified people, which I don't love to do because I want to engage with people. But when I do get an onslaught of harassment, from Gamergate or something like that, like as a form of self-care, I will just not look at my mentions unfiltered for, 3-4 days because it just becomes simply too much. And I have learned that I need to prioritize my own mental health sometimes. So I think we need to allow ourselves to actually tune some of that stuff out, because I think it's very easy to go down a hole of trying to respond to people, trying to reason with people, or turning those comments onto yourself really, really easily and being like, you're right. I am a horrible writer. I am disgusting.
Yes.
My fat face doesn't belong on your screen. I'm probably a cunt. And I don't really feel like having those conversations with myself.
I agree. And it depends on the day too, because if it's one of those days where you're already sliding down negative self-talk and then you get a comment. I got a comment once that was like, how dare you go on TV and not wear makeup and cover your pimply face? And it's like, first of all, who the hell are you?
And it's with women, it's always go for the looks.
It's always the looks. And you know what? That's what I had to separate was comment on my looks all you want. As long as you're not saying anything bad about my writing, it's almost like, all right, you know what I mean? But it's just
it's just a way for people to go, because women our value is so often assigned by our physicality.
Yeah.
That is just an easy way for people to go after women because they know it will hurt.
Yeah.
If your value is in, being a part of these, beauty ideals, then attacking the ways you diverge from them is a way to just say, you don't have value as a human being. And we can consciously know that, that's bullshit. And I think sort of thickening your skin over time and just being like, that person is a joke. This says so much more about them than it says about me is a good skill to learn. And also sometimes, I love muting people on Twitter. Not blocking, because blocking gives them the satisfaction of knowing that you saw what they said and that you were upset by it. But if you mute them, they just yell into the void.
I love that. I absolutely love that. That's a great, great, great technique to do, especially for people who get a lot of online bullying, no matter what field you're in. It happens, especially to women too. So gonna start muting out people out there who I just don't want to listen to anymore. Currently at the Huffington Post, you're a senior reporter focused on women's issues, which means that over the past couple of years, you've been really, really busy.
It's been a lot.
Yeah, so you've been at the Huffington Post for a while.
For 7 years. Yeah, it is crazy. It is crazy. I never thought I would be, I feel like millennials have this reputation for just jumping around all the time, and a lot of us do. And so I always thought I'd be like that also. And then for, just a variety of reasons, I have not left. And I've been able to grow and change roles within my company. But it's been a long journey there.
I feel like for maybe 5 of the 7 years, it might have been a little calmer and easier. But what have the past 2 years have been like for you? I mean, I can't even imagine.
Yes, ever since the presidential election started ramping up, so I guess 3 years.
Yeah.
It's been kind of a wild ride, and there's just been so much to dig into, and I've been lucky enough to be able to write stories across politics and activism, but also really digging into pop culture, which I think is just as important, but it's fun to exercise those muscles. And it's been exhausting, frankly.
Yeah.
I'd say that's the number one word I'd use to describe it. It's just exhausting. It's exhausting for any of us as citizens to just be in the news and at all these days, I think, and be really vigilant about it. It's just exhausting. And certainly to be in the news as a reporter, it's probably doubly exhausting.
Yeah, I feel like there's like levels, and it's like reading the news is exhausting, but then writing the news, reporting on it, or being an activist
yes.
is like extra exhausting. I don't even know how you're doing it, but you have this amazing role, this voice, this platform that you can tell stories on and share things that people can't really read anywhere else on the internet. What is one thing that you love the most about your job?
I love the ability to, I guess it's twofold. One, to amplify people's voices that might not have access to a platform the way that I do. I think there's something incredibly satisfying about finding a story or finding a person who's felt silenced and making their voice really, really big the way that they have, always deserved it to be.
Yeah.
Because I think all of us deserve our voices to be loud and to be taken seriously. And I also love the ability to amplify my own perspective and engage with other people through writing. I do a lot of commentary and analysis. And for me, the most fun part about that is seeing the way that people respond to, the thoughts that have sort of been stewing around in my brain. And that is just a really, really satisfying process.
November 8th, 2016 was a day that didn't quite go, I guess, as you planned. You found yourself covering Hillary Clinton. You were there waiting for the results to break. What was going through your head before the results came in?
I was there with 2 of my colleagues, fellow reporters at HuffPost, Alana Vagianos and Catherine Pearson. And we had all been covering the women's beat, but specifically, as it applied to the election. And we had applied for credentials. We were at the Javits Center where the Clinton campaign was. And I think we really thought we would be supporting our politics team. We'd prepped a bunch of stories. We thought this is going to be the night our nation's going to elect its first woman president, most likely. So that's the mindset we went into the evening with. We thought we're going to witness history right here.
Yeah.
We're going to be able to comment on it. We're going to be able to speak to people who are excited by this development and really track what that's going to mean. And then we'll probably be writing, stories about the way that sexism interacts with our first woman president over the next few years. I think that is the very ignorant mindset that we went into that night with. And clearly we were extremely wrong. And we had read a lot of things very wrong. And it's been, a couple of years of intense self-reflection. I think any member of the media probably feels that way or should. And then as the night went on, obviously things really took a turn around when the Virginia results were so close. I think is when I knew that it wasn't going to go the way that we had thought. I think I realized pretty early on, and I remember being next to one of my colleagues and who's been at this longer than me, and she was sort of like, Emma, calm down. Like, this doesn't change anything. And I was having a full body just reaction to being in this room of reporters at the Javits Center. And my 2 teammates started having like physical reactions as well.
Like, what was happening to you?
I was having a panic attack. My chest completely tightened. I had to walk outside. I ended up crouching on my knees and really like trying to breathe. And I remember seeing an actress that I won't name, but that I love, just chain smoking outside, looking extremely, extremely stressed too. And that detail didn't even register until I thought back on the experience a few days later, because for anyone who's had a panic attack, you know that it's kind of a very selfish experience, and you really can hardly see outside your own body, and it's very physical. And so I eventually went back in. One of my other colleagues was having like almost heat flashes, and another one broke out in hives. And so we finally decided we need to feel useful in this moment. We can't just sit in this poorly lit room with a ton of other reporters who are having just stone-faced, all of these men who just cover elections, and it didn't feel personal to me, and yet I was having a very personal reaction. And so we ended up saying, we need to support our politics bureau in DC. We need to write a story about what is happening tonight. And so we're going to go out on the street and we're going to start talking to people. And the Clinton campaign was having a public facing block party outside of the Javits Center. So, you couldn't be in the Javits Center unless you had credentials, but you could get tickets for this public sort of quote unquote party. And around 10:30, 11, people started streaming out and going home. Because things had taken a turn. And it was so interesting. So we went around the corner and just started trying to talk to people as they came out. And we were standing in front of this like sports bar restaurant on 10th Avenue. And there were huge windows and you could see the TVs from the outside. So people would just stop on the street and it was silent, and would just be staring silently into this bar, looking as the returns came in. And then also we would be trying to grab people who were just sobbing in panic, clutching each other, people, all different kinds of people. They had given out these little American flags at the block party. And it's one of those details that feels really crazy once you notice it and you can't unsee it. But person after person was coming out with the American flags just tightly rolled up, clutching it in their hands. And we saw a lot of people who were all doing that. And I remember my colleague Catherine pointing it out, and after I saw it once, I couldn't unsee it. But thank God for work, because that night I spent hours just talking to people and focusing on them and their stories and what they were going through. And I felt useful, and I felt like I could get through that night because I was doing my job. And that was a real lifesaver in that moment. And then I don't think it really hit me again. I didn't have that personal reaction again until I was in a cab on the way home at around 1:30 in the morning.
I can only imagine the kind of position you were in, because you're a human being with your own opinions, your own what you wanted to happen. Plus you're a reporter who does write about commentary, but you also have to support other people who have to get the news out there. So you have all of this going on. It must have been a very out-of-body experience for you to have to separate all of those different people inside of you in that moment.
Yes, I think it was, and this is part of reporting. When you are doing that, just I am reporting on what is happening in front of me, you do have to put that, opinionated part of yourself to the side and just access that purely empathetic part and just say, I am going to sit here and I'm just going to absorb. And I think in that moment, on such an intense night, that was a really helpful skill. And it was such a gift to be able to tell other people's stories in that moment.
Oh, I'm sure. And you kept doing that from November 8th on. You went to the Women's March, reported on that. And after spending the next couple of months just absorbing it, taking it all in, you decided to write a book. And the book is called A Girl's Guide to Joining the Resistance, a feminist handbook on fighting for good. It's an interesting book because I feel like the audience for the book is very wide. I bought a copy of this book for my young cousin, who is the biggest activist ever, who doesn't even need this book, but it does help her. And I've bought this book for friends who are just wondering what the hell is going on and how they too can get involved. So I think it has a little bit of everything inside of it for everyone who is interested in figuring out what's happening, becoming an activist, understanding feminism, even figuring out self-care during this really rocky time. But what was the fire inside of you during those months that said, I'm going to write a book?
I knew that I wanted to write a book at some point, and I had been toying with various ideas for probably 2 to 3 years before I committed to this project. And it just felt so terrifying to commit to one topic.
Yep.
And I just had so much self-doubt, and I knew I had a book in me at some point, but it felt like the thing you commit to is going to define everything about you, and it's going to be so permanent in a way that, the things that I write online aren't. And when this project kind of came up, and I realized there was a demand for this from publishers, it just felt so natural because it felt more in line with the work I had been doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't feel, because it was timely, because I knew once it got going, they wanted an incredibly quick turnaround. It almost took the pressure off of me because this is a project. This is a project I will work on for the amount of time that I have to work on it. I will do what I can. I will make it as useful as I can. I will make it as current as I can. And then I will let it go out into the world. And it was a lot easier to commit to doing it and a lot easier to actually do it because I didn't feel that it was a culmination of my life's work. I didn't feel like it was going to define everything about me. And now that I've written one, it's like, okay, so then you can take on another project when you feel ready to take on another project. It doesn't have to be, your magnum opus.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful. And it also just felt like this is what I had been doing. I was speaking to people who were involved in this burgeoning resistance movement. I was speaking to young women who wanted to know what to do. I was speaking to women who had been working in grassroots activism for decades, but just simply without a lot of public recognition. And so why not try to put all of that together in a little guidebook? And it's funny, I certainly get a lot of comments like, well, this is just like a beginner's thing. This isn't, everything that you need to be an activist. And no, it's not meant to be. It's meant to be that beginner's guide. It's meant to be something you can go back to relight that fire within you.
Yes.
It's not the be all end all.
But while you say it's beginners, for people who are just starting out, which I appreciated because I have to admit I was sort of just starting out after all of this happened. But I do think it's also a good book for people who have been doing it for years, who are burnt out, who are exhausted, who maybe need a new approach as well. But what people don't understand about books, and my book gets a ton of criticism because it doesn't have everything people expect all of the time, is that books aren't everything. Like, there's no one book about the entire topic ever, you know? Like, this is a great book, but then you might also want to read this book plus 5 more books after it,
yes,
you know? It's
exactly.
So I get that. And why did you think this book was needed? When you were writing it, when you sat down to pitch it, to write it, what inside of you said, I need to write this book because why?
Because I saw how overwhelmed people were. And, I was overwhelmed. And I saw a lot of my friends be very overwhelmed. So I just thought, why not go to the source? Why not go to the women, young and old, who have been so in this work and hear their stories and sort of cull their best practices from them.
Yeah.
And put it in a book that's really, really digestible and doesn't feel like you're opening your feminist theory or history 101 and you're going to have to like dig in a way that feels extra exhausting. I meant this book to be lighthearted, to be really, really accessible, that you can kind of dip in and out of. I meant it to also be fun because I think that activism and resistance and being politically engaged can be fun. It can be fulfilling. It doesn't have to be something that takes over every single moment of your life. It can be committing to a few practices that you know will make a difference. It can be committing to donations, plus committing to vote, plus committing to, calling your elected officials once every week or once every 2 weeks. And I think if we approach activism and political engagement in a way that feels accessible, in a way that feels like we can integrate it into all of the other things we do in our lives, we're a lot more likely to follow through.
You speak to a lot of activists in this book, people like Senator Warren, Ashley Judd, Black Lives Matter Network co-creator Alicia Garza. What were some of the major takeaways that you had when you spoke to other powerhouse women out there?
So there was a chapter in there that I hadn't originally included in my outline, but I think it's sort of maybe the most important one, is the power of your own story. And I was so interested that when I started talking to all of these women, something that came up in nearly every interview was personal narrative, and the way that personal narrative, can increase empathy and can play into movement building. And I thought that that was so interesting, especially given the fact that we live in this internet age. We live in this age of self-confession. So how can you, again, utilize the tools you have at your fingertips, which include social media, which include your own experiences, and how can you kind of weaponize them in a way that's really, really productive, and also use them as a way to build connections with people that you might not be connected to otherwise. And I just loved speaking to women who I admire so much, who have radically different life stories from me, and hearing how they've done those things.
You give a lot of advice for people who are just starting out, whether it's to start local, whether it's to choose a specific topic or a cause that you're really, really wanting to become more involved with. But when people do decide to get involved, what are some good tips for people who are just starting out?
I think, as you alluded to, finding that thing that you feel enough energy behind that you can run, the marathon, not just the sprint on, that you can really make a commitment. And that's why I stress committing to things that are actually practical for your life, and also holding yourself accountable. So maybe you find one candidate in your state or your county for an office that you feel aligns with your belief system. Commit to phone banking for them, commit to canvassing for them, and then recruit a friend to do that with you and turn it into something that's fun. The more you can do with your community, the more that you can do with the people in your life, the more likely you are to commit to it. Just like I forced my roommate to go to yoga with me early, because if I tell her I'm going to go to a 7 a.m. yoga class, I will actually go. But if I just commit to myself, I'll wake up and be like, I'm tired, and go back to sleep and not do it. It's the same thing with, finding a buddy to go out and canvass, or finding a buddy to text each other when you call your Congress people.
I like that.
Holding yourself and other people accountable is the only way that you can make, a sustained change.
I like that, and I like the starting local thing for choosing local candidates to stand behind, to help out, to go rally behind, because a lot of us don't care about local elections. A lot of us don't realize when they are.
They are so radically important.
You say that, like you said, a lot of the things we can vote in locally make the biggest difference, but I feel like not most people, but a lot of people don't even know that.
Absolutely. And even as someone who is informed, there are moments where I have found out about a New York primary the day before and been like, how did I not even realize what is on the ballot? I need to look this up now. And I'm someone who is in the news, who should be so hyper aware of these things. So first of all, forgive yourself if you have not been tapped in. Now is the moment to do it. And I think, you're seeing, at least on the left, a lot of organizations pop up to kind of support this awareness. Mm-hmm. Amanda Littman, who worked on the Hillary campaign, who's just a powerhouse 27-year-old woman, she started this organization called Run for Something that supports local candidates on the left. And they have so much great information, and they are stacking races that before, maybe no one would have even run in. Mm-hmm. And that is the way that you stack the pipeline for the national politics that we pay so much attention to, is those people come up through the county level and the state level. And again, so much of our legislation around, the local economy, on if you're a small business owner, if you are a woman that needs access to reproductive health care, a lot of that is happening at the state and local level. And so you really, really need to pay attention. We all need to vote. We all need to vote in every election. The midterms are coming up. Please look up when the primaries are in your state. Please vote in the midterm elections. There is notoriously low turnout, especially for Democrats and especially for young people across the board. And when you don't vote, you're just saying, like, I'm not going to take responsibility for what's going on in my nation. And your vote does matter, even though I understand that sometimes it feels like it doesn't.
Oh, for sure. And I'm registered to vote in Florida, which might be not the most legal thing in the world, but I fly home to vote in Florida. Not for the, I did fly home for the primaries, and I did fly home for the election, but I need to get that changed to vote in more elections, because I know people in New York City, wonderful women who are running for things in New York City that I can't vote for, that I can't even get involved with. And that's why you want to get involved with your local community, because you're going to feel more connected to the place that you live.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. That is, you are living every day.
Yeah.
The conversations that are happening at the most local level, where the stop signs are.
Yeah.
That stuff actually affects your life, because you're the one driving down those roads that haven't been repaired.
Right.
You're the one who is trying to go to that clinic in your town that has been shut down or isn't getting funding.
Yeah.
So pay attention.
Sort of switch topics, but it does all connect.
It all comes together.
It all comes together with you, Emma. You started the podcast. You are a co-host of a podcast called Here to Make Friends. This podcast combines feminism with The Bachelor, which I think is a sentence I never thought I would say before I started listening to your podcast. But what made you and your co-host decide to start this type of podcast?
We have a lot of fun.
Yeah, you've been doing it since 2015.
Yes, I can't believe it's been 3 years. It's absolutely bonkers. But it started, I don't even know. The podcast program at HuffPost had just begun, so they were sort of taking pitches. I had been writing Bachelor recaps as sort of a little side part of my job, because we had realized that there was this really engaged online community around the show. I always say, weirdly, like, I've only been a professional Bachelor watcher. I didn't watch the show before I started covering it, and now I know way too much information about it. My co-host Claire, who's a culture reporter, had been tweeting about the show for years. She'd been watching it for longer than I had. And she came to me and said, I tweet way too much about this, and I annoy all of our colleagues when I come in and talk about it. You're writing these recaps, and I had been getting pretty exhausted with writing them because it'd been a while. She's like, what if we just pitch a podcast? Neither of us had done podcasting at all. And we thought, sure, let's give it a try. And we talked to the head of our audio team, Caitlin Bogucki at the time, and she was like, okay, let's figure out an outline for a pilot episode. She let us tape an episode, which I cringe going back to listen to now. And it did well enough when we tested it that she greenlit it for a season. And we've seen just an incredible amount of growth season to season for the podcast, and it's been just such a delightful experience.
How do you tie feminism in with The Bachelor week after week? Because sometimes when you watch that show, it's so frustrating that a show like that still exists, yet you can't stop watching it.
Yes, that is exactly the feeling. I have a lot of conflicted feelings about the show, as does Claire, which is probably why we need an entire podcast to talk about it. But I am fascinated by The Bachelor because it has been on the air with a very intense audience, a very large audience of primarily women since 2002. So it's one of the longest running reality shows, and I would argue maybe the longest running and the most culturally relevant.
Yeah.
You hear a lot more mainstream conversation about The Bachelor than you do, say, Survivor, even though Survivor's been on a little bit longer than The Bachelor. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact, not because it is a feminist show. Like, I want to be really clear. We don't tie feminism into The Bachelor because we're saying, and now The Bachelor will be feminist. No. I don't think it's ever going to be a feminist product. But I do think that when you consume any media or culture, you should be a critical and informed consumer. And that makes it more interesting and more fun, and also I think allows you to watch things that might not line up with your value system and engage with them in a way that feels useful. So we, look at the show and we break down as fans kind of what's going on in it, and also kind of turn a critical eye to what are the messages that this show is sending us about love and sex and dating and gender roles. And there are a lot. And it's also been interesting to watch kind of the baby steps that the franchise has taken to sort of address the concerns that the outside world has with the show, and the small ways that it does grow year after year. A few years ago, they wouldn't even ever explicitly address sex on the show. And now we're at a moment where they'll have full-out conversations where they do address sex. And that might seem small, and it is small in the grand scheme of things, but it also signals to me that something has changed in the world around the show to have that happen.
Yeah.
We are living in a different moment than we were in 2002. And it's interesting to track our cultural shifts through sort of something so lighthearted and silly and quote unquote fluffy.
No, but I get it. And I think The Bachelor is something that will stay on for quite some time. And I think it will.
As long as it's making money, it will.
Yeah, and I think it will keep changing. I've tried out for The Bachelor twice.
Oh, that's amazing.
Not because I wanted to get on, I think, for the main reason to just, mess stuff up.
For the story.
Yeah, and also just to be, different than everybody else. But, of course, they didn't let me on. To sum up with you, I want to do a quick lightning round. So I'm going to ask you some questions and just answer whatever comes to your mind. When you were a kid, what did you want to grow up to become?
I wanted to be a Broadway actress.
No way.
Yeah, and or writer, actually. But yeah, Broadway actress.
There's still hope. There. You can still do it.
I don't know. I think the ship might have sailed, Jen.
Well, what's your dream job now?
I actually don't have a dream job. I find it more productive not to have a dream job and just to try to take opportunities as they come my way.
What advice would you give yourself at age 22 graduating from college?
You don't know anything, and that is a very, very good thing. Be open and be grateful.
What is one thing you want to accomplish this year?
I'm really trying to work on more kindness to myself. I have a really nasty habit of a lot of negative self-talk, and I'm trying to do away with that and just integrate more habits that are respectful to my mind and my body. So as I sort of alluded to before, I'm committing to going to yoga 3 to 4 times a week.
Nice.
And I see that less as I'm trying to get in shape and more as a therapy addendum. It's a way to actually clear my head in the morning and start my days feeling positive and kind of affirming that my body is there and it works and it's doing its job.
Well, I'm going to that right after this. We should start going together.
Yes, anytime.
All right, my final question for you is fill in the blank. You're not getting any younger, so
enjoy life as it comes at you. Enjoy the moment that you are living in. Grab life by the, I don't want to say balls,
could say
by
balls.
The vulva. and go with it.
Thank you so much, Emma. Please tell our listeners where they can find you, where they can follow you, and where they can read you.
You can find me on Twitter at EmmaLadyRose, on Instagram at EmmaLadyRose as well. You can find my podcast, Here to Make Friends, on iTunes or any podcast app. You can find my book, A Girl's Guide to Joining the Resistance, on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or at your local bookstore. Buy local if you can. And you can find my work on HuffPost.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emma.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, you. Thank you for listening to the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast. There are hundreds of thousands of pods out there, so thank you for listening to this one. You can find the show notes for this week's episode up on our website, anyyounger.com. Subscribe, rate, and review the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast on iTunes so that other ears around the world can listen too. Oh, and join our secret You're Not Getting Any Younger Facebook group, where over 1,000 people are talking about how to disrupt their lives, for good reason, to make it count. Until next week, All my love, Jen Glantz.